We're in the kitchen and crying in the bedroom all night while wearing our little black dress in good old Denton, USA. Thank God I'm a man. We watched Shock Treatment today on...
The f*** is this?
Hello, however you wish to self-identify, and welcome back to The F*** Is This, where we dive through DVD bins, sort through streaming apps to find the weird, the bizarre, and the unloved. I'm Kaz Lesgard, and joining me always is my co-host, Jameson Rafter.
That's my name, don't wear it out.
And joining us, our first post-apocalypse guest. She is a Vancouver-based actor and improviser, Anastasia Brown. Thank you for being on our show.
Hello.
Hello, nice to meet you.
And today, we're going to be watching a movie that, Anastasia, you suggested. We are watching 1981's Shock Treatment. The sequel? Question mark?
Equal?
To the classic 1975 The Rocky Horror Picture Show. I'm thrilled. I'm so happy that you suggested we watch this. It's kind of breaking the rules that I wanted to enforce upon myself for movies on this show, because this movie does have a cult audience, and I like to try and lean more towards movies that no one is talking about. This may end up being the most mainstream movie we've ever done on this show, but it was an awesome suggestion. I love that you suggested it, because Rocky Horror Picture Show, one of my favorite movies. I have never seen this follow-up, and more personally, you and I, Anastasia, met when we were doing a theater production of the Rocky Horror Show.
That is correct.
Ties in perfectly to our friendship. So, have you seen this movie before?
I actually, funny enough, I had never even heard of it until I was in the audition process for our production of Rocky Horror, and I came across it, and it is the weirdest, least plot-driven movie I've probably come across.
Awesome. We watch a lot of those.
Yeah, and it definitely, you were talking about the cult following, which is, it's funny to me because I feel like anytime I've brought this movie up to any person who I know that knows Rocky Horror, they generally have never even heard of this because of the fact that it just kind of didn't have the same charm as the Rocky Horror Show, but it still definitely is just as strange for sure.
Well, the story behind it is really interesting. I'll go into it a bit, but that leads me to two questions that I was going to ask you, Jameson. Have you seen the Rocky Horror Picture Show?
I didn't know when the right time to tell you this, Kaz, but I have never seen the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I mean, I've heard...
That, I was actually kind of hoping you were going to say that.
It's odd to me because I've certainly heard of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I've never heard of this sequel. So it's odd to me that a cult movie, which I just assumed didn't do so well at the box office when it first came up, but found its audience as a midnight movie. I'm surprised that it got a sequel, and I've never heard of this. So I'm hoping that I don't have to have seen Rocky Horror Picture Show to get what's going on. I've certainly heard Time Warp. That's kind of...
Yeah, totally. Oh yeah, Rocky Horror, even if you haven't seen it, it's so soaked in pop culture now that there are so many elements that, again, it's one of those movies, even if you haven't seen it, most of the stuff that happens in it. You certainly know, the big songs.
Yeah, through stuff like cultural osmosis, I probably would have picked up a couple of things that are oh, well, that's something from Rocky Horror Picture Show.
I genuinely love that you're going to see this before you see Rocky Horror. I think that's a fascinating perspective, and it's great because now we have three different perspectives. We have Anastasia, who's seen this movie, me, who loves the original, who hasn't seen it, and you, who's just going in completely blind.
The Philistine who doesn't appreciate the arts.
Someone out there asked you before, Jameson, how do you like musicals? Because this will be our first musical that we've ever done on the show.
I don't mind musicals. I think I prefer musical comedies more than anything. So something like Spamalot or The Producers. I sometimes like to cheat. I consider Blues Brothers to be a musical. The South Park movie is a musical to me.
Yeah, I'd buy that. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I'm not an avid theater goer, but I have seen, as a kid when my mom and I went to, New York, I saw Starlight Express and Les Mis and Rent. So I've seen them. I'm just not an avid theater goer.
How much do you remember about Starlight Express? I've never seen that, but that looks like a weird...
I saw it in London. It was...
Yeah?
You know what? It is weird. I mean, I think at one point I kind of dawned on me, like during like one of the more emotional songs that has like a big finish, but after like a small 5-second quiet period, it startled the audience when he hit that high note. And I get the feeling that I wasn't the only one who was bored and confused at that show.
You know, I think if we live in a world where there's a big screen, big budget adaptation of Cats, at the very least in the next few years we should get a Starlight Express movie.
Exactly. And the thing is, Starlight Express, one of the first musicals to feature rap, so...
There we go.
Rap written by Andrew Lloyd Webber is always a fun thing.
For those listening who don't know, Starlight Express is a musical where all of the actors play one train.
Yeah, and they're all on rollerblades, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
So what kind of fucked up coke were they on when they came up with that? That's wild, man.
You could say that about a lot of the stuff that Andrew Lloyd Webber wrote. But anyway, enough about that. We're talking about Shock Treatment. Co-written and directed by Jim Sharman, the highly acclaimed and renowned Australian theatre director and original director of both the original 1973 production of The Rocky Horror Show and the 1975 film version, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, which was written and created, of course, by Richard O'Brien, who met Sharman while acting in his production of Jesus Christ Superstar. Now, I've got some backstory on Shock Treatment here. So, Anastasia, if you hear anything where it's like, oh, I know that, and you want to jump in here, feel free to jump in. We can do the Zoom thing of raising your hand, and then I will be quiet, and I will let you take over.
For sure.
But I have some backstory here, so I will dive through that very quickly. So, in 1978...
And if I decide to tune out and not listen...
This is the part of the show where Jameson takes a nap. So in 1978, Richard O'Brien started working on a sequel inspired by Rocky Horror's cult midnight success, originally called Rocky Horror Shows His Heels. Don't really know what that means. It would have featured Frank and Rocky coming back to life, Brad and Dr. Scott becoming a gay couple, and Janet becoming pregnant with Frank's child. And I'm just realizing, Jameson, now that you have not seen this movie at all of this probably sounds like utter gibberish to you. You don't know who any of these characters are, but I'm gonna power through regardless.
Question, who is Rocky Horror? Why is he important?
He's actually not that important of a character in the overall show, just to make things twice as confusing. He's a minor supporting character at best.
I didn't even know there was a character named Rocky Horror. I thought it was like Monty Python.
He's like a sexy Frankenstein.
Yes, that's the perfect way to... That's the perfect way to explain both Rocky Horror the character and Rocky Horror the show in general. Sexy Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Yes, where was I? Alright, the story that Richard O'Brien wrote was rejected by both director Jim Sharman and actor Tim Curry, so Richard O'Brien reworked some of the songs into a new script, which was called The Brad and Janet Show, which eventually became Shock Treatment. The character of Dr. Scott, who was the character that I played in the stage production that we did, was originally a character in this movie, but when actor Jonathan Adams turned the project down, the role was rewritten as the character Bert Schick, which is a great character name. Tim Curry was set to play the new antagonist, Farley Flavors, which is a Tim Curry character name if I have ever fucking heard one. But when he found out that Barry Bostwick wasn't coming back, he would have to also play the role
of Brad.
He turned it down thinking he couldn't pull off a convincing American accent. But I also think that has to do something with the fact that it would just be shockingly weird to see a sequel where Tim Curry is now playing the role of Brad. How odd would that be? Can you imagine that?
Oh, I can't.
There's two conversations going on here.
I'll give you guys the floor on this.
So to make this movie extra confusing for fans of the original, characters returned from the first film, played by new actors, while actors who were from the first movie are now playing brand new characters. Even the built-in audience for this is kind of confused going into this, Jameson. So if anything, you should feel right at home with them.
Alright, I was worried that I'd be like bad company with this, but I see we're all in this together now. That's awesome.
That's right. So replacing Susan Sarandon as Janet is actress Jessica Harper, who's best known for another 70s cult rock musical, Brian De Palma's Phantom of the Paradise, which I also amazingly have not seen yet. I really need to get on that. Have you seen that, Anastasia?
I've seen clips, and it is wild.
Yeah, it's weird for Rocky Horror being one of my favorite movies. It's very weird. That seems like an obvious contemporary that has just as big of a cult audience, and yet for whatever reason I've never gotten around to seeing that. Gonna have to do that soon, I think. But Jessica Harper, known for Phantom of the Paradise, she's also known as the lead in Dario Argento's classic horror film Suspiria, which we've talked about on this show.
Oh, okay. That's a name I'm familiar with.
Yes. She's the only actor to be in the original and in the remake. So replacing Barry Bostwick as both Brad and new character Farley Flavors is Cliff DeYoung, who was Jim Sharman's original choice for the first movie to play Brad, but who had to turn it down due to commitment to a TV series. So that's pretty cool that he eventually came back around and he got to play this role again. So good for him. We'll see to how much diminishing returns that ends up being. Returning from the first movie are, of course, Richard O'Brien himself, playing the role of Dr. Cosmo McKinley, Patricia Quinn, once again playing O'Brien's character's sister.
Incestuous sister, yeah.
Incestuous sister, very important to...
Yeah, common thread with the two of them.
What the fuck is this musical?
I genuinely love the fact that we're going to be talking about Rocky Horror as if it's just like old hats, and all you're going to get, Jameson, are just like these context clues as to how truly weird that show is. I don't think we should explain anything. I think we should just keep you in the dark as much as possible, because I think that's where most of the comedy is going to come from.
You know, eventually I am probably going to get around to watching Rocky Horror one of these days, and I'm so upset that I'm going to be watching like its lesser known sequel in like before I watch Rocky Horror, and that's going to inform most of my opinion. Maybe I'll appreciate it more. Maybe this will make me a huge Rocky Horror fan.
I hope so. But also returning from the first movie is Little Nell Campbell, who's playing Nurse Anne Salong, and the criminologist himself, Charles Gray, as Dr. Judge Oliver Wright. In addition, popular comedians Rick Mayall, aka Drop Dead Fred, stars as Rest Home Ricky, and also Barry Humphries, aka Dame Edna, as the aforementioned Bert Schick. The only actor to return from the original film in the original role is Jeremy Newson as Ralph Hapshat, presumably in a slightly bigger role than last time, because I don't think he had a single line in the first movie.
No, walked out of a church and that's all you saw of him.
In addition to this, a lot of the extras in this movie are the same extras who played the Transylvanians in the first movie. So if you look at the crowd scenes, you may recognize some familiar faces. This movie was released on October 30th, 1981 in limited release on the Midnight Movie Circuit, and was a massive critical and commercial failure. So this movie didn't even get a wide theatrical release. It went straight to midnight movie screenings, which just goes to reaffirm the fact that you can't really create a cult movie. It just kind of has to happen.
It's lightning in a bottle, and I think like this, a move like that just kind of screams of, oh, we know how to make a successful movie, when they didn't the first time around.
I think that fact more than anything else probably best sums up why this movie isn't as well known as it is because Richard O'Brien made this movie specifically because he wanted to capitalize on the first movie's success, and he assumed the built-in core audience from Rocky Horror were just going to come to it and love it immediately. And, of course, that...
with none of the original cast or characters, or majoritively not with the original casting characters.
Well, because they did this weird thing where they kind of did that, but then they also put new actors in the same role, so it was just confusing.
You're shooting yourself in the foot. Yeah.
But over the years, Shock Treatment eventually found its cult audience. 2015, it was finally adapted to the London stage with minimal success. So, Anastasia, is there anything else you want to add? Your own personal experience with Shock Treatment?
I think I've seen it maybe fully through twice in the time that I've known about it, but I have listened to the cast recording countless times, because as much as you will see the plot line lacks a little, I find the music to be honestly possibly better than Rocky Horror's music, but that's just my opinion.
Wow.
Interesting.
That is high praise.
It leans more into like that kind of 80s rock feel, seeing as it left the 70s and is now set in the 80s quote unquote. So yeah, it has more of that driven rock feel behind most of the songs, and so it's definitely a lot more easy listening, whereas Rocky Horror was a bit more out there.
Well, the songs in Rocky Horror, the whole performance of it, they're so tied into audience interaction and audience participation. Jameson, I think it would be really interesting if a live production of Rocky Horror were to come through Vancouver again. It would be really interesting going with you to that, because there are going to see, musicals, and then there's going to see Rocky Horror, and the two really aren't the same at all. I'll describe my experience being in this show with you, Anastasia. It was to date, one of the best theatrical experiences I've ever had in my entire, several decades career of being in plays. And without going into too much detail, it was a tempestuous rehearsal process at best. And leading up to opening night, I remember having real sort of fears and insecurities that it might not all come together. Certain elements weren't quite working the way I think we all wanted them to. But then when the curtain went up on opening night, within the first 5 minutes, we all felt this collective relief, because if there ever existed a show that is audience and critic proof, it's Rocky Horror. It comes with a built-in fan base who will love what you're doing no matter what, and I've never had that much freedom in a show before.
And I definitely, speaking from the standpoint of a performer, the connection with the audience is almost like a high. And when you're doing something where the audience is so engaged physically and vocally and mentally and emotionally, that really, there's a feeling that you get from performing Rocky Horror that you don't really get from most stage shows, because of the fact that you have that direct connection with them, and they feel free to yell at you while you're on stage, or throw a playing card or toilet paper at you, and there's that actual, that physical connection between you and the audience, and that's a feeling unlike anything else.
And also, Jameson, not even a live production. If you go to see, when hopefully movie theaters return to the earth and we can go to them again, when you go to see a midnight screening of Rocky Horror, it's not the same as any other movie. Are you at least somewhat familiar with the packages that you get when you go into a screening of Rocky Horror? You get props.
Not at all. I mean, the closest thing that I can equate this to would be if I went to a screening of The Room, where people know when to yell out things at the screen, or when to toss spoons at the screen.
That is directly taken from the Rocky Horror experience. Without Rocky Horror, there wouldn't be The Room. The whole concept of the midnight movie really started here, which was interesting because Rocky Horror in and itself is a deconstruction of the concept of the midnight movie. And it's funny how something that kind of started as a satire or something went on to be the prime example of that very thing. And so when you go to see Rocky Horror, there are moments where you're supposed to yell at the screen. There are things that you're supposed to call certain...
Not only that, you're encouraged to do that. It's audience participation. They want you to get wild. They want you to break conventions. And that's certainly something that, I should experience. When I'm at the movie theaters and, the audience laughs at a joke that I didn't think was funny, or they're talking, I get a little annoyed at something like that. But when it's encouraged as part of a show, then, I'm all for something like that.
I would recommend watching Rocky Horror at home first. I mean, you don't have any other option currently right now, but I would recommend doing that first, and then going to see some live show, because you will not hear 75% of the dialogue if you go to see it with an audience. You just won't.
Yes, that's probably the right way to do it. But I'm taking a weird trajectory where I'm watching the unheard of sequel before I even check out the first movie.
Speaking of which, let's do that. Let's take a break. Let's watch Shock Treatment, and when we come back, we'll break it down. This is going to be interesting. We've never done a musical before. I don't know how the breakdown is going to work when we have to talk about the songs, but there's only one way to do it, and that's to do it. So we'll see you after the break, everyone.
To find out.
Stay tuned.
Catch you later.
Hey everyone, it's Kaz. Now, Jameson and myself have been doing some thinking, and we realized we have this natural sort of break in the show that we never do anything with. So we're going to start using it to shout out local charities. We both decided that part of the cost of what it takes to produce this show is also going to go to us donating to a different charity each episode, and we're going to take this break in the podcast to tell you, yes, you Dave, why you should donate as well. There's one guy named Dave right now whose mind is blown. Now, I've always been of the opinion that giving to charity is a lot like voting or giving blood. Everyone should do it, but don't go around talking about it. I mean, come on, like, oh, I gave to charity. Look at me, how altruistic I must be because I gave to charity. Everyone, heap thy praise upon me, for I gave to charity. But what I realized is, we have a podcast, which means we have a platform, which means if you're actually listening to me talking right now, that means I can reach you. And if I can reach you, then maybe I can also tell you about a bunch of amazing charities and programs that you should absolutely check out. Just like this week's charity, the Hogan's Alley Society. A few years ago, I used to work in a restaurant near Vancouver's Chinatown district, which was situated next to a building that I was told used to belong to Jimi Hendrix's grandmother. And I always filed that away as a neat little piece of Vancouver-based trivia, but what I never took the time to either learn or realize is that area used to be Hogan's Alley. It ran all through Vancouver Strathcona area, and it was an ethnically diverse neighborhood to many Canadians who came from abroad, from backgrounds from, Italy and Japan and China. But more than that, it was home to a large number of black families, black businesses, and Vancouver's only black church. But in the 1970s, most of Hogan's Alley was destroyed by the construction of the Georgia Viaduct, and today, what little remains bears no resemblance or suggestion of the vibrant black community that used to call it home. Now, I use the Georgia Viaduct a lot. It's a totally solid bridge. It helps me get downtown super fast, but it didn't need to be built at the expense of people's homes, people's identities, people's culture, and community. Come on! Vancouver could have had Hogan's Alley this entire time? Think of how great that could have been for this city to have that historical, cultural landmark that families could have raised their families in for generations. Think of how it could have grown and evolved. Think of the art and the music that could have come out of it. Think of how much better it would have made this city if we had nurtured and supported it. But no! We got rid of it, and we stripped people of their homes, because we're Canadians, and that's what we like to do that. And you know why? That's right. Say it with me. Systemic white supremacy. So, to quote their website, the Hogan's Alley Society is a non-profit organization committed to furthering and spotlighting the presence of black history in Vancouver. They're committed to promoting the historical, cultural, societal, and economic contributions made by black settlers and are in the process of developing partnerships with local governments and business interests to acquire and develop land and operate assets as a community land trust. So, go to hogansalley.society.org, where you can learn more about the organization in their own words, which are a lot better put and contain far more context and historical information than what I just tried to give you. And while you're there, sign their petition and get the city of Vancouver to take immediate action to redress the displacement of the black community and to move forward on their proposal for a non-profit land trust. And you can also make a donation to the society. So come on! Even just $10 is something. You can afford that, right? Take a week off from getting your venti latte or whatever and give some money to a cause that's trying to give black Canadians their identity back. So, that was the first charity spot. We're going to do it every episode. We're going to switch off. Jameson is going to do the next one. I know he was worried that he didn't talk in this one. Believe me, this was both of our idea. He's going to do the next one. I'll do the one after that. And if you're still listening and you want to suggest a charity for us to spotlight, please send us a message on our Instagram. The F is this podcast. And if you're still listening and you're thinking, man, listen to these guys, old Kaz and Jameson up on their soapbox telling me what to think, and this show has really gone downhill. You know what, man? Don't listen. We don't want ya. Turn us off. Matter of fact, if you're listening and you don't consider yourself to be anti-racist and anti-fascist and anti-homophobia and anti-transphobia, and if you believe white privilege doesn't exist, you know what? don't listen to us either. We're not for you. We're just not for you. So go to Hogan'sAlleySociety.org, make a difference. Come on. I want to see them get that community land trust. I didn't even know what a land trust was until I visited Hogan'sAlleySociety.org, and now I know. And if you don't know and you want to know, look it up. And we're back. We're back from shock treatment, and boy, I feel like I had a little shock treatment after that.
For sure.
Okay,
How the fuck do you think I feel?
this is unequivocally the most confused I have ever been post-movie on this podcast so far. I can flat out tell you, Jameson, your position not knowing anything about Rocky Horror, you don't need to worry one bit. That movie had nothing to do with Rocky Horror. So as confused as maybe you're feeling right now, I can tell you I'm probably more confused.
Okay, good, because I said in our message chat, I just had one question for you guys. Like, I have several questions, but like, the thing that I'm most interested hearing from you guys is, do you consider this to be like a worthy sequel of Rocky Horror?
It's more of a parallel universe than a direct sequel.
I didn't mention this at the beginning, but I do have a quote from Richard O'Brien himself. He said that he doesn't consider this to be a sequel, he doesn't consider this to be a prequel. His official stance on it was he considers this to be an equal.
Equal.
Not true. Not...
Speaking as someone who was in a production of that. Yeah.
Yeah, this is more of a side story, kind of. It's really, for our recap and our plot breakdown summary, Anastasia, I'm gonna be leaning
For sure, yeah.
heavily on you to help us break this down. Just by virtue of the fact that you've seen this movie more than once.
Yes.
This is a hard movie. On this show, we share our first reactions to something. This is not a great movie to have first reactions to, because there is so much to unpack in this. But what did you think overall, Jameson, of the movie?
I thought it was fucking weird. You know what it reminded me of was, there was a show, that was on when I was a kid called Erie, Indiana, where, like, it's sort of like a kid-friendly Twilight Zone, kind of creepy shenanigans going on in, like, a rural town. And this seemed like it would have been a middle-of-the-pack kind of episode of Erie, Indiana.
There is something to be, like, it does sort of feel like an anthology story. Like, this kind of seems like a cliche every time someone says this to describe something, but there's the germ of a decent Black Mirror episode buried somewhere in this story. The thing that it reminded me most of, weirdly enough, it reminded me of a movie I saw. It's a Polish mermaid musical called The Lure, which is about a couple of man-eating mermaid sisters who get found by an impresario and then become minor celebrities, and it reminded me more of that than anything in Rocky Horror, basically because it had a lot to do, they both sort of had to do with the concept of celebrity. What's interesting about this movie is that it comes from 1981, and it's sort of ahead of its time because it's kind of about the concept of reality television.
Yeah.
Years before reality television itself became a mainstay. So it's interesting. It wants to say something about society, but before the whole concept of reality documentary TV became mainstream. So it wants to say stuff about a society that I don't really think existed in 1981. Or if it did, it wasn't what it eventually morphed into. Anastasia, what's your take on this film?
Well, I definitely am now questioning if Richard O'Brien is a time traveler. But no, it's definitely very interesting because of the whole reality TV show aspect of it. Even looking at Janet's storyline, there's something about that moment she puts on that little black dress that is made for her. For that soft caress as you slip into that little black dress. That she suddenly feels like a Kardashian almost. Like everything becomes about her and she, like that's her first focus and her first goal is to further her own career after that point.
This movie has so many plot threads. At a certain point, I realized I have to start writing down and keeping track of how many additional plot threads are going on in this story, because there's about 5 of them, and they're all kind of happening at the same time. And there's an unfortunate influx of characters, and the movie keeps adding characters. About midway through, they introduce about 5 new characters who end up not really having any effect on the story whatsoever. It's just adding more. It's characters that don't have any effect on the story, and it loses focus for a while there. I thought it was interesting in a movie, one of the interesting revelations in a movie called Shock Treatment that has a song called Shock Treatment. No shock treatment happens in this movie, which I thought, well, they have Brad locked in a cell, and they're all singing a song called Shock Treatment about how great shock treatment is. You need a bit of shock treatment. You're jumping like a real live wire. Need a bit of shock treatment. So look out, mister, don't you blow your last resistor for a sister that'll certify ya. You would think during that song, Brad would be getting shock treatment, but he doesn't. And I thought that was kind of strange. Okay, so to maybe help color in a little bit of the connective tissue, what minor connective tissue exists between this movie and Rocky Horror. Anastasia, do you want to help me sort of explain to Jameson what minor things carry over from the 2 movies? Because there really is very little.
Very little. I think obviously the biggest thing is the characters of Brad and Janet, who are in the original movie, as well as there is a very, very brief cameo of both Ralph and Betty Hapschatt in Rocky Horror, and they become fleshed out characters in Shock Treatment, apparently. And then there's even like the big light up sign that's in the studio that says Denton, the Home of Happiness, is the exact same design that was on a sign in the beginning of the Rocky Horror Picture Show behind...
Oh, I didn't catch that at all.
Yeah, in behind Damn It, Janet. It's just like this big faded sign, and they've updated it and made it TV friendly and given it a bunch of flashy lights and Shock Treatment, but it's the exact same sign, which is weird because, yeah, like it's still in Denton, but again, there's no through line from Rocky to this at all.
And that's it? Jesus.
That's basically it. Yeah, there are 2 central characters that appear in both movies and 2 minor throwaway characters that have slightly been given kind of beefed up roles.
Okay, well, with this being like the 2 characters carrying over, the principal characters carrying over, was this a journey that like you're kind of glad that they went on? Like, did they need to go on this kind of path?
These characters are Brad and Janet in name only. They really don't, other than some mild archetypes that were already kind of, because they weren't really characters in Rocky Horror either. They were just okay, so as we were saying earlier, when you go to see Rocky Horror, there are a list of things that you're supposed to yell at the screen. And as an audience member, every time someone says the name Janet, you have to yell, slut! And every time someone says the name Brad, you have to yell, asshole! And that happens every time the characters' names are mentioned in the play, and the characters' names are mentioned in the play a lot. So that happens with frequent regularity. Brad appears to be the same character that he is in Rocky Horror, almost to the point that that's kind of built into the plot, his character. Janet seems to be a completely different character entirely, and that's a misnomer because that implies that character growth has carried over from the previous movie, and the previous movie doesn't exist. Like, they're really, it's unfair to call this a sequel to Rocky Horror, cause it really isn't. And like you said, Jameson, this feels like 2 musicals that have been mashed together. That seemingly is exactly what this is. It was Richard O'Brien started making a direct sequel to Rocky Horror. A couple of people, including the director, told him, that's a terrible idea. And then he had this other idea about TV, studio, advertisement, brainwashing people, and he just kind of took the characters of Brad and Janet and he plonked it into that musical. But the two of them have nothing to do with each other outside of those two characters.
It's an odd setting. Like, the whole movie takes place in, I suppose, a world where everyone inhabits a TV studio and watches like a variety of shows that play out in front of them in real time. There's like a morning show, a dating show, a soap opera. I guess there's like a news show, but it gets canceled, and those characters become like an investigative team that wind up saving the day, I guess. Yeah. It's a weird setting for a movie. I think that is a plot of a Black Mirror episode where where everyone is sort of trapped inside this controlled TV environment.
I agree with you. It's a weird setting for a movie. They didn't have much of a budget to go off of on this movie, hence the fact that everything takes place in one location. But it feels very theatrical, which is odd because Rocky Horror Picture Show is a very cinematic movie, but it's based on a stage play, but specifically it's based on a stage play that got famous for very small venues. They didn't have big production values for it. It was very small houses. It wasn't a terribly theatrical play, but when it made the jump over to the movie, it became very cinematic. Weirdly parallel to that, this was always a movie first. It was always designed to be a movie first, but it feels like a stage play. So there's a very odd disconnect between these two stories. And likewise, Rocky Horror is a movie about these two straight characters who live in who very much, at the beginning of that movie, you get the feeling that these characters live in the real world, they live in reality, and then through a car accident, they go to this house, which is filled with weirdos who turn out to be aliens, and it's very much a story about two normal characters who find themselves in a weird world. Now, years later now, we've gotten this sequel, I guess, or equal, or whatever Richard O'Brien wants to call it. It's the same characters, and they're back in their hometown, but it now seems like their hometown reality is even weirder than the alien house.
Yeah, like everyone, like the whole town was destroyed, and the only thing that was survived was a TV studio. So everyone just lives in and sleeps in and works in the TV studio. Like, there's a cop that goes around, like, sort of like keeping the peace or whatever of this TV studio.
You'll find conference rooms and a children's playground. Denton is a real okay town. Civic pride and civic duty. And Denton girls are full of beauty.
There's the coffee guy who keeps everyone fed. Everyone sleeps in the stands. It's odd.
It's really, I didn't know what to make of that, because when the movie opens, we see the audience being let into the TV studio, so they have established that there is in fact a world that exists outside of the TV studio.
Yeah, and the movie ends with, they all escape the TV studio at the end.
But then in between it, there's one musical number that's all about, let's go to sleep and have like a good night's sleep, it's time to sleep, and we see all of the audience just asleep in their chairs. I also, like the way that the TV studio is set up, we have the news desk over here, we have the soundstage where the commercials are shot, and all the commercials are shot live. But then Janet goes home, or goes to her parents' house at one time, but her parents' house
is in the studio.
It's on a soundstage, and they everyone seems to live inside of the studio.
And everyone seems to watch them, too. When I mentioned that, like, part of the shows there is a soap opera, every scene that takes place around the parents has, like, the soap opera organ music.
Love starts in the home, and where better to find this than in today's Happy Home, with guest star Janet Majors.
And it has like the Dentonvale title that goes on through it. It took me a while to clue in that, like, wait, this is another show. Like, everything in this movie is a show. Brad, what do they do? They're on that dating show, and his prize is to get shock therapy. So instead of him actually going to an institution or a hospital, which I originally thought was what happened, he just goes to a doctor procedural kind of show and is imprisoned there.
They wanted the structure of the movie to be that everything was a show and everyone was being watched at all points in time. I don't think the movie did a great job of showcasing that, because there are some times when the whole TV show aesthetic is kind of dropped. But then again, Rocky Horror is not the most through line of plots, but it is so much easier to follow than this movie. This movie really didn't have any focus to it. It kind of just seemed like a collection of scenes that near the end they realized, oh, we need to tie this together somehow. Let's make these two characters long-lost twins. Which seemed like a revelation that didn't go anywhere, so I don't know.
It was really strange watching it through this time, because I've seen it a couple of times, but this was the first time that I think I understood the story.
Well, now that you've said that, please give us like a plot breakdown.
Thank God someone was... I mean, like with any musical, I always assume what I don't get, it'll either be explained in song, it'll be explained between the songs, or it doesn't matter because the whole thing's about the pageantry and the show and the choreography and the music and everything.
And I have some gripes about the songs overall, but yeah, do you want to...
But please, by all means, enlighten us.
Please take the reins here and try to help us and the people at home give some sort of form to what happens in this.
The most disjointed part is going into the music is if you look at the music in Rocky Horror, for the most part, it advances the plot and it has to do with the story that's going on around it. This one feels like a collection of music videos that they tied together with a storyline. Like, even to the point where we're in the studio, sure, like everything is already a little surreal because of the fact that it is on this soundstage and there's the cameras everywhere. But then as soon as you get a music number, at times it almost just kind of removes itself from that setting. And it's now like, okay, am I just watching this music video that has nothing to do with the story just because you wanted to throw this song in here? But at the same time, I'm not complaining because, you know, if you're a little high or drunk, it's probably going to be a great movie to watch, so.
Yeah, I mean, as the person here who knows the songs the best, is there any song that drives the plot or the characters forward? I couldn't think of one. They really...
Not a ton.
No, the songs are more theme-based than they are plot-driven, and I kind of can't stand it when musicals do that, because the whole purpose of a musical is it's a story that has the characters singing because the emotion is so high the characters they have no choice but to do anything other than sing. I don't really know why the characters are singing in this one other than it's a midnight movie rock opera. I wouldn't mind going back and listening to them a second time. A lot of the music is really good. It still got that great sort of 50s inspired sort of doo-wop type of music to it. They were disappointing in the sense that they didn't really drive the plot of the characters. They were also disappointing. Did you find them weirdly short?
Some of them, yeah, definitely. Or there'll be a song that stops for, I think it's the song that she sings to herself that just says me, me, me all over. It fully...
I mean, I know the one that you're talking about, but like the song that she sings to herself, that you could be describing all of them.
It's all of them that Janet sings, for sure. No, but it stops for like a solid maybe 10 minutes, and then she comes back with a line that is in the cast recording, part of the song that was 10 minutes ago, but they just decided to throw these like two little lines in at the end, and it's so strange. The music, it really doesn't further the story, and it almost feels like Richard O'Brien was kind of cursed by the subject matter that he chose, because it felt like he almost started writing the music to make you feel like it's as like falsely generated as this reality TV show aspect that we're looking at, and it makes you kind of be like, okay, but I understand that this is a musical, but what is actually real in this? What am I taking from this? And yeah, it's almost like the whole TV studio plotline kind of screwed him over a little.
Well, because very little of this movie is based in reality, there are moments where characters start having dream sequences, where the movie gets even more artistic and esoteric than usual, and it starts adding in dream logic. But because the movie begins and ends in this heightened reality where you're never sure what's real and what isn't, it just adds to the confusion when you start adding in the concept of dream sequences. Because, yeah, I was never certain what was real and what was meant to be satire, question mark?
Yeah.
I kept thinking that there's something in this that should have a lot of subtext, because, like, it's trying to say something about the nature of, you know, a TV culture and celebrity worship and, like, chasing fame and stuff like that. But I don't, for the life of me, know what the fuck it's trying to say. Speaking to, like, you know, just like how surreal and dreamlike everything looks like, what was really super jarring for me was in the scene where she goes back home to visit her parents, there's a box of cornflakes on a counter, and that took me out of this movie, where, like, they didn't make up a cereal. There's, like, an actual branded piece of real world cereal, and that literally took me out of the movie, more so than you guys. And, like, I don't know what's a part of a song, what's part of a music video, what's part of the story. That took me out of the movie.
Yeah. So we've gone almost half an hour. We haven't even begun to dissect the plot of this. I almost wonder if we should even bother at this point.
We could just give it a quick summary. So, in this world where everyone is trapped in a TV studio, Brad and Janet are pulled from the audience to be guests on this marriage, what's the marriage game?
Marriage Maze, yeah.
It's like a show where they take the couples whose marriages are on the rocks. It's hosted by this wacky German
Tommy Wiseau-esque kind of character.
Let's get the camera in there, for heaven's sake. Over the moon about that commercial, Macy.
Thanks, Bert.
I got a good show lined up for us tomorrow night, Ralph. Oh, you bet, Bert. Good. I'm gonna be there. Ain't we all, viewers?
Maybe blind.
who I guess is pretending to be blind, which is maybe sort of meant to be set up as like a big reveal later on. It's also revealed later on that a lot of the doctors and medical professionals in these TV shows are later revealed to be actors who aren't meant to be medical professionals at all. But I don't really, that reveal didn't really have any weight to it, because again, it's really hard to figure out what's real and what's not in this world. But so Brad and Janet are having marital problems. We only know this because the movie continually tells us. There's never a scene that showcases what precisely the problems within Brad and Janet's marriage is. We just accept it, and we, as you and I, Anastasia, and others, as Rocky Horror fans, accept it immediately because, as fans of the musical, we know what a loser Brad is, because he's meant to be the archetypal wimp. There's not really a reason to hate Brad. In both stories, we just hate Brad because we've been told that we hate Brad. But we don't really see why we're supposed to hate him other than he's just kind of a dork. And and he has, negative male stereotypes tied into his character. What I thought was really interesting about this movie is that there's a subtle little throwaway line right at the beginning. I think it might be the first lines that Brad and Janet say in this movie. Brad and Janet come into the TV studio and they're going up into the audience, and Brad kind of has a moment where he sort of wavers. He's all like, I don't know about this, Janet. And Janet grabs his hand and says, like, it's gonna be okay, Brad. And then they go into the audience.
What are we gonna do, Janet?
It's all right, Brad. Everything's gonna be all right.
And that's very flipped to
Yeah.
the relationship that Brad and Janet have in Rocky Horror, where Brad thinks he's this sort of like man's man, macho man archetype, and Janet is the wilting flower. And then over the course of that movie, they realize that they sort of rushed into this marriage, and maybe there's more to their personalities and their sexuality than they originally thought that they had. If we were carrying those characters over from the first movie, that might be seen as character development, but I really don't think these are meant to be the same characters. I think they have the same names, and that stops at that. We aren't meant to buy that these are the same two characters who went through the journey in Rocky Horror and hung out with aliens and had their sexual awakening, because they've regressed as characters. I really think it's just the names and it just stops at that. But anyway, moving on. So they go on this troubling marriage show. Brad ends up, I guess, committed or whatnot. There's signing of papers. We meet Richard O'Brien and Patricia Quinn's characters, who are very similar to the characters that they played in Rocky Horror, but different, so you sort of wonder, either A, why aren't they playing the same characters, or B, Richard O'Brien just didn't have that many characters in his head in the first place, so he kind of just wrote the same characters again. But yeah, they're playing brother and sister who are clearly in an incestuous relationship, except maybe they aren't brother and sister this time.
It's, yeah, definitely a lot cloudier, whereas in Rocky Horror, it's like they fully call each other brother and sister when it's just the two of them around, so it's not like they're trying to hide anything. This one, it's like, well, maybe they are just lovers, because you find out later that they've been taking names of presidents to serve as their false names and false identities.
And then we find out that they've been on other shows in the past, but what shows and to what end, we don't really know. But yeah, so the basic crux of what happens throughout the majority of the movie is that Brad has been committed and he's being pumped full of drugs and he's presumably getting shock treatment that we don't see on camera. Again,
he's not. They just threw him in a cell.
Seems like a weird thing to harp on, but if the movie's called Shock Treatment, I want at least one scene where he gets treated with shocks. But I don't know. It seems like a minor thing, but so as this is happening, we find out that, I guess, like, the studio is being run by this all-seeing fast food magnate named Farley Flavors, who is played by the same actor who plays Brad, because we find out as the story goes on that not only was Brad an orphan, but Farley is his long-lost twin, and he's sort of pulling the strings, and he has a clear attraction to Janet, and we get that Farley knows that Brad is his twin brother, and he's jealous of Brad, despite the fact that he is a successful billionaire.
Yeah, not only that, but, like, he has ambitions, I suppose, to do what he did here in Denton, which is to encase the whole town in a TV studio and then give everyone, like, the same therapy treatment that he locks Brad away into. He's essentially starting, like, a cult movement, and he wants to take over the country.
I really wanted more out of this Farley Flavors character, and it's interesting reading what I read on Wikipedia today that this role was written with Tim Curry in mind. I'm really glad that Tim Curry wasn't in this movie, and that's one of the only time you'll ever hear me say that, because
he makes every movie he's in better just by him being in the movie.
Without a doubt. If I haven't said it on this podcast before, Tim Curry is hands down my favorite actor of all time. And yeah, I've seen most of the stuff that he's been in, and most of it is terrible. But he's always the best part, and it's always great to see him in things. But I'm really glad that he didn't take this character, because this character doesn't really get much to do.
Yeah.
For presumably being the main antagonist of the movie, he doesn't really do much. And when he does come on and is like, here's my evil scheme, it doesn't really add up to anything. Yeah, anyway, the crux of this is that Brad's getting his treatment from all of the crazy doctors, while Janet is becoming a bigger and bigger star, and she's letting fame go to her head and becoming, just like with the turn of a switch, kind of turning into a horrible person but we don't see the build-up to that.
No.
Yeah, I was lost to how the ball got rolling on that in the first place. They take her out of an audience, they kidnap her husband, they put her in the show, and then they start drugging her up, and she's, like, addicted to the limelight. What the fuck is going on here?
And then, in addition to that, there is another subplot involving Betty, who, as we said, was a super minor character in Rocky Horror, who has now been given her own B-plot, where she's now divorced from Ralph, but they are both working at the TV studio. I say working ? Because it's still sort of ill-defined, because it feels like working is a misnomer because everyone seems to live inside of this TV studio and is not allowed to leave. So they're cogs within the studio. Betty is, I guess, a news anchor, and we see her at the beginning interviewing this
Judge Wright.
He's a judge. He's like a judge. He's a professor.
And everything he says just sounds so fucking ominous.
So in Rocky Horror, this actor Charles Gray plays essentially the narrator, and he's not connected to the story at all. He just interjects throughout Rocky Horror, sort of giving unnecessary narration. It's always a lot of fun when he shows up, though. Yeah, but yeah, and this time he has like an actual character, and him and Betty have this weird little subplot that I thought was going to turn romantic at the beginning, but it doesn't. It stays fairly platonic throughout it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of half-ass flirting that goes on between them. But what happens is their show, which I guess is sort of like a Dateline or a Charlie Rose kind of interview show, it gets canceled, but they still are allowed like free reign throughout the studio. And they're trying to expose Farley Flavors and TV show itself and save Brad, because apparently they give more of a shit about him than Janet.
Betty's show gets canceled and then is replaced with Ralph, her ex-husband, and his new sort of bimbo girlfriend. Yeah.
Macy Struthers.
But again, we don't really see that show take place, so I don't really know what they were replacing it with. Yeah, the whole Betty Judge subplot is very confusing, and every time it cuts back to the characters, it kind of kills the momentum of the movie, and it cuts back to them a lot. Their subplot led to one of the most genuinely confusing moments, and I know you found this confusing too, Jameson. So they're reading poetry at one point?
Yeah, really, like, everyone's asleep, and they're reading this, like, very somber and nice-sounding poem.
A stately pleasure home, indeed.
Oh, I adore Coleridge Taylor.
But it's completely out of tone with the rest of this wacky movie.
Once like one that hath been stunned and is of sin forlorn, a sadder and a wiser man, he rose the morrow morn.
And it ends with, like, a security guard finding, like, a dead bird.
Does this bird belong to you?
Like a big seagull.
Like, just taking, like, that 30 seconds of the movie, and it ends with that, like, taking on its own, that's a weird fucking thing to show in a movie.
My only guess is that it's a very highbrow joke that Richard O'Brien threw in there that must be like a literary reference to whatever poem they were talking about. Because maybe it was like a too smart for us, clearly literary reference. I don't know.
And now it's time for a new segment called Poetry Context Corner with Kaz Lescard. The poem that Betty recites to the judge is Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which, in broad strokes, is the story about a sailor who, out of ignorance, shoots and kills an albatross while out at sea, leading to the deaths of his crew and ultimately cursing him to wander the earth in penance, telling his story to anyone he meets. The judge's comment of a stately pleasure home indeed, however, may be a reference to another Coleridge poem, Kubla Khan, although the line in that poem reads, a stately pleasure dome decree. So to recap, the dead albatross was a reference to the poem, and Betty's subsequent scream refers to the portent of doom the dead bird symbolizes. None of us were cultured enough to get that, and now that I've looked that up, I still have no idea why the scene is in this movie. This has been Poetry Context Corner with Kaz Lescard.
But it was a very weird scene, and it went...
I don't know, like, to be honest, like, I was, as soon as Brad, like, sang, like, the first words to, I don't even know the name of the song, but where he goes, oh, Blender.
Bitchin' in the kitchen.
Fucking done. Like, if I saw that in a movie, I would have walked the fuck out. Like, I am not watching a guy sing a song about, like, appliances.
Dear Blender,
You won't blend into the background with us in your home.
won't you help the first offender? Oh, toaster,
Not under the popularity rating.
don't you put the burn on me?
Look at this.
Refrigerator, why are we always sooner or later? Bitching in the kitchen or crying in the bedroom all night.
So I was, at that point, I was like, ugh, this fucking movie.
No, I completely agree with you. I think if back in like 1981, if I was someone who found the Rocky Horror show and became like a fan of it and went to like these cult things, if I was in the audience, like the first audience people who went to see this at midnight in 1981, I think about the time we get to the Bitchin' in the Kitchen song, I would also probably be as checked out as you were, because I'd probably be equally as angry and confused. I'm all like, what is, this isn't the thing that I like. It says it's the thing that that I like.
Pulled a fast one on me.
The problem is there's just an influx of characters that don't drive the plot forward. Midway through the movie, we're introduced to this band
Oscar drilling the bits.
that Janet sort of meets them, and she's gone through her whole rising reality TV show star thing, so she meets this band, and she's sort of checked out, and then the band shows up. They have one song that is so throwaway, I don't even remember what the song was or what it was about.
It's about spending your life in the closet.
Oh, well, that would have...
The Breaking Out song, which was like played in tandem with the scene of Brad getting busted from his cell by by Betty and the judge. You know, clever of you, movie.
I guess, yeah, this really does require a rewatch. It's not an easy movie to talk about first impressions, because, yeah, I clearly missed so much. I didn't get that it was meant to be an Is the band meant to be a closeted homosexual allegory? Because I missed that entirely, because they're barely characters.
Yeah, as somebody who's listened through the cast recording several times, the message of that song in particular definitely feels like, hey, it's okay to be gay if you're gay, but it's not addressed in the movie whatsoever.
No, the great thing about Rocky Horror is that it obviously has found an audience within the queer community and within the LGBTQ community. Like, you can't say that about Shock Treatment at all. It doesn't return to those themes at the least, and those are the themes that I think most people find so interesting about Rocky Horror. So,
like, the one thing I do know about Rocky Horror is that, like, it is very important to, like, the queer scene. And I was, like, waiting for elements of that to come forward in this movie. And there's hardly anything super sexual in this movie. There's a sexy nurse character who shows her underwear at one point. But the most I could say about her is that I can't understand a damn word she's saying.
Oh, that was real short. No,
That's my big takeaway from the sexy nurse character.
Why did you tell me not to sign now?
Wow, that's where you get the first day free.
she's an actor who was also in Rocky Horror playing a different character, playing the character that you played in the stage show, Anastasia.
Columbia.
She is completely wasted in this movie. They did not give her
fully
anything to do, and she's a fairly important character in Rocky Horror, and this was sort of, yeah, we'll give you something to do, Little Nell. But yeah, she's the worst served, I think, by this recasting in here.
Yeah.
I think if I may give some notes to a movie from a professional writer and producer that came out 4 years before I was even bored, I really think the connection to Rocky Horror really hurts this story. I think Richard O'Brien should have cut all ties to Rocky Horror. If he wanted to tell this story about reality television and how the media affects us, he should have just done that, and he should have just left Brad and Janet out of it entirely. I was sort of thinking, though, if he wanted to have some sort of connection to that universe, I think it would have been really interesting if instead of Brad and Janet at the center, he should have made those characters Betty and Ralph.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Because they're introduced in Rocky Horror, but they're not characters at all. But if we wanted... So Brad and Janet leave their wedding, and they go off to the Frankenstein mansion, and they have their own sort of fantastical journey of self-discovery. If this were posited as what happened to Betty and Ralph after they left their wedding, and they go off and they have this weird sort of adventure in another part of the same town, at the same time that Brad and Janet are having their weird adventure, I think this would have worked a lot better.
It's funny that you say, like, having a connection to Rocky Horror does this movie a disservice. As the one person on this show right now who hasn't seen Rocky Horror, that did nothing for me. This is still a weird fucking movie.
So if we've discovered anything, is that you need no knowledge of Rocky Horror to watch this movie, and a knowledge of Rocky Horror does nothing to help heighten your enjoyment of this movie at all. So what happens in the plot next?
At this point, Janet is now getting seduced by fame, as, I guess, as far Farley Flavors is grooming her to be, I suppose, his wife when he like takes his big campaign across the country.
I didn't get what their connection. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, just another place where it just didn't really make sense is we get this scene where Dr. Cosmo and Dr. Nation wheel in this TV with this music video from Farley Flavors that Janet sits there and watches intently. And she's like, oh, Farley Flavors definitely doesn't look like Brad. And then later in the movie, comes face to face with Farley Flavors and calls him Brad. Like, it just, there's so many disconnects in the logic of that. It's hard to fully follow what's happening because you think one thing's happening and then they zag on you.
There's a part where she goes back to visit her parents, kind of sticking up for Brad and like how much he's a weak-willed kind of person, and they don't like him.
What are you trying to do, Harry? Start an argument? Don't you want your daughter to look pretty?
She got to look pretty for.
She's got a husband.
She's got a weirdo.
And then later on in the movie, they get a little bit more concerned about his whereabouts, and like, when she gets seduced by Fame, they're like, what about Brad? Where's Brad?
My God, Janet, how can you say such things? Look at Brad. Look what they've done to him.
Are you the doctor? Yes. There's going to have to be an investigation. There are regulations about this sort of thing.
It's for his own good.
We only want what's best for you. You must understand.
No, I don't. Brad doesn't need to be trussed up like a turkey. There are drugs to keep him quiet.
But after the song Shock Treatment happens, they change their tune completely, and by the end of the movie, they've sort of been taken over by Farley Flavors or whatnot. I guess I would say that with more assurance if Janet's parents were better defined as characters, but they're not.
I mean, the dad sings a whole song about how he loves being a misogynist, manly man, alpha male.
And men should be the misters and the masters of their sisters. Man should be the reason for a heart to break.
And then he gets concerned about Brad, and then he's also drinking the Kool-Aid of Farley Flavors and totally on board with like whatever his global domination plans are. It's a weird trajectory.
I mean, as I've said lots of times already, there's too many characters in this movie, and it didn't help for me anyway, because the actor who's playing Janet's father and the actor who was playing Ralph looked completely identical to me, and they're in a lot of the same musical numbers, and most of the time I was completely confused as to which one of them I was seeing. It was only because Ralph has a blonde bombshell girlfriend that I was ever able to tell, oh, okay, that's that character and that's the other character.
I kept getting Janet's mom and Betty Hapschatt confused because they have the same like brown hair styled in a similar way, and it just, very, very confusing and hard to follow.
So eventually what the climax, as it were, of this story is Betty and the judge find the dirt, they find the revelation, they find out that Brad and Farley are twins, and then they break Brad out of his cell where he's been sitting for the entirety of this movie, and there's sort of like this big show to end all shows where all the characters come together with the main villain, sort of like orchestrating everything. There's another weird swerve where the president of a car company comes out.
That's so fucking weird. Like, ladies and gentlemen, the president, and he's just like the president of a dealership.
Ladies and gentlemen, the president.
And he offers out, like, the keys to a new convertible, and then he fucks off.
An almost brand new, ultra deluxe, 8-cylinder convertible, complete with radio, tape deck, washable seat covers, and many, many extras, and it's all hers for absolutely free.
That and the dead bird thing are like the two weirdest. What was the point of that? Why was that necessary of this movie?
The only argument that I would have in favor of that scene with the car is just for the fact that that's their getaway car at the end, and they just wanted some kind of like, oh look, here's a car, wonder why that's gonna be there, and it's.
But have any one of our already familiar characters say, you win a brand new car or something. Why bring out a fucking new character for 20 seconds and then he fucks up for the rest of the movie?
That's the only reason that it's there, is so they can have that game show archetype of, and a new car! Horror. And they kind of subvert it a little bit because the guy's all like, and you have like a basically new car, but like they don't really hit that as a joke, so it doesn't land. So again, it just seems like a needless distraction.
Someone had a funny idea where like, what if we said like, ladies and gentlemen, the president, and they introduce the president, and everyone thinks they're gonna meet the president, and instead of, oh, you thought you meant like the president of the country. No, it's the president of like of a used car dealership.
I thought they meant Farley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He seems to be the president of the network or something. They keep building up Janet to be, I don't know, so like a star, like some sort of big celebrity.
Miss Mental Health. They label her as Miss Mental Health, which is weird because everyone in the audience saw that it was Brad that was going to go to the fucking asylum to get better, to get his treatment, and then she comes back.
Okay, so Farley's evil plan seems to be, or I guess like the satirical message of this movie. Richard O'Brien is trying to say something about the state of mental health. And maybe it's just the fact that we're so far removed from what I guess the public consciousness was in the 80s. I don't know what public opinion was about the mental health initiative at the time, so we're sort of like removed from that. But he keeps having lines that are like connected to leading the way in like terms of mental health. He says one line,
Sanity today is a springboard to the hygienic tomorrow.
and I don't know if that's meant to be deeper or if that's just meant to be an empty platitude that we're meant to be all like, oh, haha, do.
Yeah. I'm still trying to wrap around my brain about like, what is his plan? How is he going to achieve these goals? How did he turn an entire town into a TV studio?
I don't know. I don't know what he was trying to accomplish. But anyway, Brad eventually finds his way onto the set. They have a confrontation within their minds.
Twin brain connection,
It's like how those twins know what the other one is thinking. You know, it's twin speak.
Yeah, they just see the same 80s music video in their head.
And then they just shun Brad and Janet from the studio. That's their fucking punishment. Because, you know, Janet comes to and realizes, oh, there's my husband. I didn't sign my life away to Farley Flavors. We're gonna wrap up this plot in a nice little bow.
Janet doesn't seem to have any sort of revelation, though. Like, leading up to this moment, she's still brainwashed, I guess, or she loves fame and she loves people paying attention to her. But Brad storming onto this set, she doesn't even have like this moment where she realizes the villainy of Farley or anything like that. She just kind of gets up and is all like, this is my man. And then Farley, I guess, half-heartedly captures them and Betty and the judge. And by that, I mean they kind of shove them into a coat closet. They have one disinterested cop who's barely guarding the door. But then everyone, all of the studio audience runs
backstage to get like the same therapy that Brad got, I suppose.
They go somewhere.
Brad, Janet, the judge, Betty,
and the band.
The band get away.
Who were totally characters.
They escaped this TV studio in the car, and that's the fucking movie.
That's the movie. Yeah. What else didn't we mention? What else didn't we talk about?
There's a joke that Bert says to Brad when he's like failing the marriage game or whatever.
But I don't need treatment. You do need glasses, stupid. Doesn't the customer?
Brad already has fucking glasses.
I didn't even notice that.
What the fuck?
And that was a blind man telling him that, so no, I missed that entirely. I just want to point out my favorite line of the movie, when Brad is in his therapy cage or whatever, and Janet's parents are walking around. It's like, it'll be okay, Brad. Janet comes in with her amazing black dress and her amazing hat, and she says,
Hi, Brad. I've just come to tell you how fabulous I am.
That is the one thing, if I'm taking anything away from this movie, it's that. I'm gonna drive that at a couple parties, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you and me both.
Can you, no, but wouldn't that be amazing? Like, people would talk about that for years. If you, like, came to a party, walked in through the door and just said, like, I just dropped by, I can't stay long, but I just wanted you to all know I'm fabulous, and then you left, and then you come back for the rest of the party.
Yeah, like a martini in hand and a cigarette holder.
Do that once, yeah. Anastasia, there's anything else that you wanted to talk about?
Honestly, I think at the end of the day, I think this movie's biggest disservice is the music, and the music's biggest disservice is the movie.
Wow, well said.
Damn. Damn!
Great sum up. Love that.
I feel like if we didn't have all of the random jump cuts to these music videos that make no sense, we could have fleshed out the story and it could have made sense and it could have been easier to follow. But yeah, it just together doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, on that train of thought, I mean, obviously, you're in a unique position on this show, given that you literally recommended we watch this movie for the podcast, but just in a general atmosphere, would you recommend this movie to other people?
I have recommended this movie to anyone that I think could appreciate something that they don't fully understand. I like to kind of personally dive into the weird side of things. So yeah, especially when we were doing Rocky Horror, there were several people who I felt that I'm like, you might like this. Here, give it a shot.
What I will say to that is we've remained very close to that cast. We've all stayed very close friends to everyone, and that we often have like a running Facebook group thread going on where we all kind of like talk and catch up with each other. I'd love to get together with the cast someday and watch this, because I'd love to know their opinion on this. I'm surprised we haven't done that yet.
I know for a fact that Draco has seen it, but I think he's the only one other than now the two of us.
So Jameson, as someone who is not a musical theater person at all, would you recommend Shock Treatment?
What do you fucking think? Of course not. I mean, that's why I wanted to ask you at the top, do you consider this, as fans and people who have been in the show, do you consider this to be a worthy sequel of it? Because then I could have the defense of, I just haven't seen Rocky Horror, so I can't speak to its praises or what have you. But like separated from that, no, not at all. This is so fucking weird. And it's, like I mentioned, like I do enjoy certain musicals. They're not exactly my favorite genre of entertainment, but this is not great for me. This is, as much as I can tolerate like a good musical, like this is a little over the waterfall for me. You know me, I don't like any kind of avant-garde kind of shit, and a lot of this is pretty avant-garde.
Yeah, this turns that corner hard. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, to answer the question that you just posed, that's is this a worthy follow-up to Rocky Horror? That's an unequivocal no. This is a tenuous connection to that show at best. What I will say is that now that I've seen this, I definitely want to watch it again. And what I just posed, watching it together with our cast or any cast of musical theater people, I think is maybe the way to watch this, because in a bigger group of those like-minded people, they're likely to bring some takes on it that I'm not quite thinking of right now. So I think I will probably rewatch this movie again sometime. As to the question of whether or not I liked watching it, I don't think I can give that a yes. I think it's a little too scattershot. It doesn't hold together as a cohesive whole. I don't know necessarily if that's what Richard O'Brien was going for. I think maybe he succeeded at what he was trying to do with it. We often say that it makes more sense to remake a failure than it is to remake something successful. And I think Shock Treatment's a perfect candidate to remake. And because it was so ahead of its time with the whole reality television thing, I actually think it would be great if Richard O'Brien, both those guys, Richard O'Brien and Jim Sharman, they're still around. I think it would actually probably benefit them maybe revisiting this. I know it was adapted for the stage, and I know that they made some changes to it, so maybe the stage production is actually better. I wouldn't know, because I think it was a fairly small stage production. I don't think it got any wheels. I don't think people are doing Shock Treatment, but it might be interesting to see it in like a fringe festival scenario. It might work better as a stage show. I'm not sure.
And just call it like from the makers of, or the people who brought you Rocky Horror Picture Show. Don't call it any kind of sequel, prequel, equal, feeble.
Certainly not an equal. Yeah. That was 1981 Shock Treatment. Anastasia, thank you for suggesting that, and thank you for being a guest on this show.
Thank you for being our first guest in a lot of episodes.
Yeah, there was a long stretch where we were doing solo work, but it's good. It's good to have a third voice on the show yet again. Do you have anything going on that you might like to plug?
Well, I am currently working on a improv show that I am doing with somebody named Kaz, I believe.
Oh, fascinating. Tell me more. That's a weird name.
It's called Tales from the Lost Galaxy. It's a long-form sci-fi space improv epic, I guess, with a bunch of fun characters, and we do bi-weekly shows on Sunday night, and we will eventually be putting it out as a podcast. So we're Tales from the Lost Galaxy on Facebook if you want to look us up.
That's right. Yeah, our third episode is happening tomorrow. Of course, by the time that this episode comes out, that will be weeks ago. But yeah, no, that is currently happening. Jameson, how you do? You got anything going on that you want to tell the people about?
I want to do a little plug here. My sister is in a, similar to you guys, in a online improv podcast. She's in an improv group called Paint Bucket, and they normally do little shows at Little Mountain Gallery. She's got every Tuesday at 7:30. She and her improv partners do Pod Bucket, which is just them, being improv actors, taking suggestions from Instagram and people who like tweet stuff at them. It's fun. It's a funny show. They do
Awesome.
it's pretty creative. Yeah, there's really like kind of no holds barred to what they do.
Awesome. Is that over Twitch as well?
Right now, I think they just do it over Instagram and or FaceTime. And other thing that I want to recommend is just the other night I watched the movie Dope. Highly recommend that movie. That is a very good movie. Yeah, good like half coming of age high school story with like also like the gangland territory of LA. It's a good movie, and I like the message at the end of it.
Cool. Yeah. No, that's been on my we should check that out list for a while now. So that's good. Yeah. No. Cool. I'll
Yeah, it just got put on Netflix. It's quite good. I was not disappointed.
Is it on Netflix? Okay, good. I was looking for it, but yeah, no, I'll check that out. Yeah, it's been a busy week. I don't have anything specific to plug, but just like if you've listened this far, like now is the time to seek out movies by people of color and to seek out movies and TV shows by Indigenous artists and expand. If you haven't before, expand your watching circle. Try to watch something. So my recommendation for this episode is to watch something that may be slightly outside of your regular watching parameters. Challenge yourself, try to come away with a different perspective, because now is the time that we should be doing that. And on that note, as my voice is completely breaking.
It's been gone for like the last 10 minutes, dude. Have some water.
Oh boy, yeah. Do you want to close this out? Because I can't talk anymore, apparently.
Getting choked up over here. That's such a beautiful sentiment that I just made.
All right. Okay, well, now that I have hydrated, Anastasia Brown, thank you so much for being on the show. That does it for another episode of The Fuck Is This? Join us next time when we do something different. So until next time, you stay frosty, deputy dogs.
Yeah.
That's my catchphrase, Anastasia.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, there's a story behind it, but we're not gonna get into it right now.
It's from a movie that we watched a couple of months ago. That's all you need to know. I used to like that line, I used to think it was a funny line from a movie.
It'll come around again. It'll be funny again. All right. Jameson, play us out.
What?
Jameson, play us out.
I'm ending the Zoom call.
Jameson, play us out.
Jesus Christ. It's magic, That's a little known band called Pilots.
Good enough. B+. All right. Okay. And stop.